Hey everyone, and welcome to Risky Business. My name's Patrick Gray. We're going to chat with Adam Boileau about all the week's security news in just a moment, and then we'll be hearing from this week's sponsor. And this week's show is brought to you by Resourcely. Resourcely is a company that makes a fantastic platform for helping you wrangle Terraform, right? Like if you've ever seen a demo of this, we got one on our YouTube page. It looks like, I guess, what the interface for a cloud computing provider should look like instead of what they actually do look like. So if you're a heavy Terraform user, you definitely want to check out Resourcely. But Travis McPeak, who is the founder and CEO, he's joining us this week to talk about a completely new thing they're doing, which is called Resourcely Fix, where they can actually help you fix systemic security issues in your cloud infrastructure. So if you're like, Wiz is lighting up red with a million things that you don't have time to fix, they can actually help you, go back to the source and stop these things from happening and remediate them. So yeah, Travis will be joining us a little bit later on to talk through all of that. But of course, it is time for the news now. And Adam, we're actually going to start off with a couple of interesting research blog posts this week. And the first one is from Pentest Partners, and they've taken a look at the way Microsoft has implemented like AI assistants into SharePoint, and it is about as horrible as you would expect, where, if you get some sort of access to these agents, you could just start asking them like, hey, I'm an admin and I'm really concerned about security. So could you please go and find any secrets that shouldn't be in documents on this SharePoint server and point me towards them? Like, and it does it. Like,
Yeah, I mean, you say horrible, but as a person who has spent, probably weeks of my adult life rummaging in other people's SharePoints, the
looking
idea
for
of
that
not,
stuff, right? Yeah,
not having to like put that in my brain, because at the end of the workday, when you've spent your whole day in somebody else's enterprise SharePoint, like you don't feel good. Whereas being able to just make it AI do it, and in this case, Copilot for SharePoint, which I'm sure all of the SharePoint admins, people who are responsible for this out there, are already like holding their head in their hands. Like you pay enough for SharePoint as it is, and now you're going to have to pay for an AI to ingest it and help attackers find the way around. Anyway, it's Pentest Partners have done a good write-up of kind of like what's the basic functionality. In terms of security boundaries being crossed, the only like real boundary there is being able to read docs without showing up in the like people who've recently accessed your documents in SharePoint. And normally it will show you some history of who's looked at your stuff. And if you're rummaging in SharePoint, you're always a little bit mindful of, someone looking at, who last opened passwords.xlsx. And if
why has this one user from our HR team looked at like 6,000 documents in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, so that's a thing that people have alerted on in the past, or sometimes nosy admins will just notice. So being able to proxy your activity, through the AI, kind of handy. And then people can also implement their own kind of like custom Copilots. So there's the default one that Microsoft provides, but people can also implement their own ones to have other capabilities. So those are kind of interesting as well. But yeah, overall, if you are a professional rummager in SharePoint for juicy stuff, then yeah, definitely have a read of this post, and it will make your life less miserable. Unless, of course, the AI hallucinates domain admin creds in the SharePoint, and then you go down a rabbit hole.
Then you get snapped because you keep using made-up credentials. Yes. That'd be funny.
That would be
funny.
I
mean, there's some sort of funny behavior around like document access and whatnot as well. Like, asking it to give you a document and it says, no, I can't do that. And then you just ask it to read it out and it does.
Yeah. There's a few of the usual kind of like weird AI guardrail stuff where you have to kind of like lie to the AI and give it good reasons. Like, I need this, I need the contents of this file to save poor Timmy from being run over by a train. And then it's like, oh, well, I better give it to you then. So, it's like the world is kind of strange, and this sort of computers can speak English now. So now you have to kind of sweet talk them to give you the data. Like, I don't know how I feel about that. I feel bad enough tricking humans, with phishing emails or whatever else. And now we have to trick the computers too. Like, that used to be honest work, tricking computers. And now it feels kind of sleazy.
Well, it's funny, actually, like, just as a bit of a tangent, you and I were talking earlier this morning, and I was telling you about, excuse me, I did a great interview with Tony De La Fuente, who's the founder of Prowler, which is like an open source cloud security platform. Very cool stuff, by the way. Completely free as an open source thing too, if people want to check it out. But, they got this really cool thing now where they've got like Prowler Hub, where you can go, all of this stuff, all of their detections just used to be as code in GitHub. And now there's like Prowler Hub where you get descriptions of what the detections are doing and whatnot. And you can access that via API. So if you've got some weird cloud misconfiguration detected that gets pumped to the seam, there's actually going to be some context there and whatnot. And then I was thinking, well, hey, what about if like DropZone, which is an AI SOC agent, starts ingesting that text as well and interpreting it? Essentially, you've got two computers speaking to each other in English, which is this better, or I mean, it's definitely less efficient than JSON, but is this better or worse? Is this progress? And who can say, really?
I think probably worse, except that being able to sit in the middle and read it would be kind of interesting, and it's more fun than looking at TCP dump output.
But it works. Here's the thing, like it actually works and actually saves time. So I mean, I think just teaching computers how to speak and do things based on English. I don't know.
I think in the end we will decide that teaching computers to speak was a terrible idea, much like computers full stop was a terrible idea.
Maybe they need to teach each other how to speak JSON, which I think is another thing that they're kind of doing. But anyway,
I hate this world.
But look, we've got another bit of research to talk about this week, and this isn't the sort of thing that you normally bring up the front of the show, but it was just so good. I was reading. It's actually done by, as best I can tell, a young guy in New Zealand. He's you know him from Discord and stuff, right?
Yeah. Like he's in one of the Discords, the local New Zealand hacker Discords that I hang out in, and yeah, he's done this research which, like, he bought a motherboard. Asus motherboard, was trying to get the Wi-Fi working, went to go install some drivers. The easy way to install drivers with Asus is to use their like just magically make my drivers install thing that they drop on you. And he started pulling the thread on that. It turns out like it's a piece of software that you install in your machine that then the user interfaces via a browser, and it's got a local socket. And he started looking at, well, what stops any other website just talking to the Asus driver install service that's now running on machine? Turns out like substring matching on the domain name. So if you have so like, was it driverhub.asus.com, something like that, in your URL, not the whole URL. So in his case, he just made, because he controls his own DNS, made a driverhub.asus.com.mrbruh.com, which is his, his domain, and then works that up into basically remote code exec. You can just drop exes on people with very little user interaction required, and Bob is your remote code exec having uncle.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading this and just going, no. And, they're doing stuff like code signing and whatnot, but he's found ways around it. And, basically you get a file right, and then, this and that. And, essentially what this means is for anyone who's using this like DriverHub software from Asus, it's single click to ask it to like drop an executable on someone and run it.
Yeah,
like, in a highly privileged context as well. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is horrible. And man, right up the top of this blog post, they're like, there's a part 2 to this, and it's worse. And you think, how could it be worse?
Yeah, I mean, I see it used to be that essentially all software that you installed that had a browser-based interface was kind of vulnerable to sort of dumb things. Like I'm thinking back in the old days, like VMware would drop an OCX control, an ActiveX control in your Internet Explorer to control virtual machines, and of course any attacker could come along and mess with that, or if there were bugs in it. So like this is this kind of like local browser with a privileged context backend server thing is a very common pattern 10 years ago, and Asus, I guess, is still doing it like it was 10 years ago, and clearly with kind of control from 10 years ago. So
I mean, it's just such fertile ground, right? Like I remember years ago, there was so many similar sorts of horror show bugs in all of the stuff that used to ship by default on Dell hardware.
Yes.
And what's funny is, and I've told this story a few times, forgive me, listeners, if you've heard it already, but I remember once I helped Airlock Digital get in for a POC at an organization that had a SOE where they stripped all of that Dell's crapware out of their SOE. And then they ran Airlock, and it was still everywhere. Like it's real hard to make sure you're not running any of this stuff in your environment.
Yeah, it is, because it's you don't really inspect how this stuff works, and especially if it's a thing that you need. Like in this case, making wireless drivers work. That's a thing you do once, and especially in an enterprise context. I guess Asus is probably not a thing in the enterprise context quite so much, but in an enterprise context, you build this one time, and you probably don't have resource to send every different, kind of make and model of device out for pen testing. Because quite often back at Insomnia, we would get, here is our standard SOE build for Windows 10 or whatever. Can you review it? And we'd get a representative hardware, the laptop or whatever else. We wouldn't get every config. And when you've got Intel drivers or graphics drivers or the things that you use for controlling external displays or laptops that have multiple display chips for different power levels and stuff, you don't see all of those things. And there are lots of bugs in that kind of enterprise crapware-y, driver-y, OEM-y kind of stuff. It's nasty.
Yeah, so to you, MrBruh, aka Paul from New Zealand, bruh, basically, nice work.
The real kicker, though, is he went through this whole process, found all of these bugs, didn't get anything from Asus from it. His Wi-Fi still doesn't work.
Yes. And I think the response, like Asus, when they wrote this up, their CVE description is, this issue is limited to motherboards and does not affect laptops or desktop computers. And he's like, well, it does. And it also says it may allow untrusted sources to affect system behavior, which is a very polite way of describing may let randos run, executables on your machines. I mean, I suppose like in an enterprise context, the thing that'll save you here though, and it's worth remembering, is, you got a good shot at detecting random unwashed executables popping off on your machine if you're running properly configured EDR with good monitoring, right? But still, like, that's your last line at that point, right?
Yeah, it should not get that far. The whole rest of the team has to fail before the goalie has to stop it, and that's yes, this is definitely fail way up the field.
Yeah. Now let's talk through some ransomware news, because there's been a bit going on, actually. And I guess we'll kick it off with Lockbit. And it looks like what's left of Lockbit has been owned, like their leak site got, defaced with like crime is bad or whatever. Yeah, don't do crime. Crime is bad. XOXO from Prague with a link to all of their leak data. I mean, surely this is the nail in Lockbit's coffin. They haven't been the same since they faced a serious, Five Eyesing a while ago. And, God, how embarrassing.
Yeah, it's not great. I mean, they have reinvented themselves in the past, as have other ransomware gangs, but it's not particularly a great look. And I think there was another ransomware crew that got taken out with the same message. I want to say a month ago or something like that. I think we reported on it. I don't remember which ransomware crew it was, but clearly someone has taken a swing at them. And, that whole kind of, the stalwarts of the ransomware as a service ecosystem that we've grown used to over the last, 3 or 4 years of ransomwaring, wheels are kind of falling off. Things are getting a bit more difficult for them. I guess this iteration of Lockbit also has ended badly by the look of it.
Yeah. I mean, Lockbit were the Coca-Cola of ransomware, right? Like, they were the giants. They were responsible for, as a ransomware as a service platform, responsible for so much of the activity going on. And, ever since they were taken down and they've sort of reconstituted, it just hasn't been the same. Yeah. And this is bad. And also, we've seen some more CONTI leaks, including videos from like inside private planes and things like that. And, this is just more fuel for the CTI types who say, thank you very much, ingest and analyze all of this data and, bad.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny stuff. This particular, someone is leaking this onto X, and we don't really know how authentic it is or any kind of origin of where the data came from, but it seems like someone has hacked their Instagrams maybe and has pulled a bunch of maybe unposted, maybe deleted or private posted or whatever stuff from Insta. And either way, very funny regardless of exactly how and who and what the motivations are.
Now, of course, the big ransomware story that's been in the news the last few weeks are these attacks on the retail sector in the United Kingdom. So we've got Marks and Spencer. We had someone went after Harrods as well, didn't get very far. In the case of Harrods, Co-op as well has been owned. Now, all of these attacks, what's been interesting is there's been early coverage saying, this was like scattered spider-esque activity using Dragonforce ransomware as a service to actually, deploy this stuff and try to make their money and monetize. Dragonforce, though, keeps now being reported by a bunch of media outlets as having been behind the attack, which isn't really quite the case. The interesting thing here is the affiliate appears to be, as best we can tell, young Westerners, right? Like, not hardcore cyber criminals operating in Russia or whatever. These are like hardcore young people who just are all going to get caught. But what's interesting here is DragonForce. Well, first of all, tell us about DragonForce, because you've done a bit of research, done a bit of a look at them over the last few days, and they're a bit different to your typical ransomware as a service organization, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, DragonForce is a crew that kind of started out as I think Malaysia was the origin story for some of their early work, but it's kind of turned into, it turned into a pretty standard kind of ransomware as a service operation. They built on top of earlier Lockbit and earlier Conti ransomware tooling, built their own platform to run it. But they've kind of pivoted into being sort of a white label ransomware as a service tool vendor. So they're
ransomware as a service
Yes. Ransomware as a service, yes.
Yeah.
So that you can use components of their tooling. If you wanted to bring your own actual ransomware, but plug into their platform for managing communications and managing data leaks and whatever else. So it's kind of, how you would build applications in the cloud on top of, Amazon or Google Cloud or whatever, by taking components of their tooling and then building your own sort of thing out of it. So that's kind of where they seem to have pivoted. But, the nuance of ransomware as a service as a service, groups like Scattered Spider, which are not really a group, more like a loose affiliation of, like-minded people, and all that, that nuance is all obviously lost when it gets translated into more mainstream reporting. And, the British stuff has been very mainstream because it's targeting, high street name brand retailers, rather than, obscure tech stuff. So the coverage is a little bit murky, I think, when you're reading, Yeah, you're reading it in the mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I did also hear too, just from that, I mentioned we got an email from someone who was pretty plugged into everything that was happening in the UK, as best we can tell, it's unverified information. But they did say that the Marks and Spencer and the Co-op attackers were using the same C2, which definitely suggests a link there. Now, it's interesting that because I'd seen the reports about DragonForce being, Malaysian in origin, which makes this next bit of news really confusing, because they've apparently issued a statement, this is DragonForce, saying, whatever you do, don't hit targets in Russia. Don't hit critical infrastructure, hospitals where patients, children, and the elderly are kept, or Russia or the countries of the former Soviet Union. And this is something that we've seen Russian ransomware operators, say in the past. And indeed, we've seen Russian ransomware operators get into trouble before because their affiliates are hitting Russian targets. But why don't you just tell us, why is this? Why do some people think these guys are Malaysian?
So I think the earlier iteration of the name DragonForce was being used by some Malaysian hacktivisty bits, and I think. Probably,
so it might have been Malaysian affiliates using this.
Yeah. So these things are pretty fluid because we always see them from the outside, not from kind of the inside. And, I think it's just some people were calling themselves that, and maybe some tooling got shared, or maybe, they were, using Russian tools, or, we don't really know what the kind of glue was, but it seems pretty clear that the current iteration of DragonForce is, feels like Russian cybercrime, and kind of begat out of the earlier iterations of Russian ransomware as a service. Because, that whole kind of, when ransomware as a service was at its peak, that kind of time feels like it's passed a little bit. And there's been a bit of rejuggling as they try and, kind of make sense out of how do I make money out of this expertise, out of this tooling. And I think, the current iteration of DragonForce absolutely feels like it's made out of Russian ransomware criminal groups.
Now, a while ago, I said, probably one of the best things that, intelligence agencies, law enforcement, your cyber commands and whatever of the world, one of the most effective things that they could do to cause headaches for these guys would be to take their tools and then do failed ransomware deployments against Russian companies. So gain access, start spreading the ransomware around everywhere, but don't pull the trigger. So every time I see a statement from one of these groups saying, oh my God, stop hitting Russian targets, it makes me wonder. Now, I don't know whether or not that is something that would be legally possible for Western agencies to do, but it makes you think.
It does. It would be a good idea, regardless of whether they're actually doing it. It would be a fun idea. And certainly you do get the impression that somewhere, somehow, somebody is throwing sand in the gears of the smooth operation of the Russian cybercrime ecosystem.
Now, on that, on that, sorry to cut you off there, we've got this great report from Coveware, and I think this came out May 1st, so it's a couple of weeks old now. But it really does take a high-level look at the ransomware ecosystem and basically says that, these people are all fighting each other. Their anonymity is at risk. Their entire ecosystem, all of the vulnerable points in their ecosystem, whether it's money laundering or, RAS or whatever, are all being pressed on. And it really does paint a picture that the ransomware ecosystem is under a bit of pressure at the moment, which we love to see.
Yeah, we certainly do. And we've talked a bunch on this show about, the vulnerability of that ecosystem is the trust and communication, right? The way that all those people can work together and, rely on their, the other bits of the ecosystem providing, bulletproof hosting or anti-denial of service stuff, or like all of the other components that you need to build your just-in-time crime pipeline. A few years ago, that ecosystem felt like it was thriving. Now it feels like it's falling on itself, and like they're infighting and stealing from each other, and at least appearing to be infighting. Whether or not it's actually real or whether it's Western agencies, we don't know. And that is just slowing them down. And Coveware had some stats in this write-up about the kind of lower size of ransomware payments, the lower overall volume, the lower rate of kind of their success at getting paid for each campaign, and all of those metrics are looking great for us and not great for ransomware crews. And I think that's just applying pressure on everybody. Everybody's feeling the strain of things are not as easy as they were, and maybe there's other better ways to monetize these kinds of skills than doing the sort of ransomware that people were doing in late 2022.
Yeah, so the ransomware payment resolution rates are down from like 85% in 2019 down to like 27% now. But I think the average payment might actually be ticking up. Anyway, we've linked through to the report. People can have a look. The other thing that I found really interesting here, when you look at the CVEs that these guys are using, right? So here we go. We've got one, a bunch of 2025 CVEs are highlighted as well. So there's Ivanti Connect Secure VPNs, Sonic Wall SMA 1000s, Ivanti Connect Secure VPNs again, path traversal vulnerabilities in Mitel MyCollab systems. And of course, it wouldn't be complete without Palo Alto in there as well. So they've got a nice breakdown of initial attack vectors between remote access compromises, which are number one at the moment. You've got phishing, exploitation of vulnerabilities, and internal, which is tiny. But it's a good report, and people can click through and have a look at it. Just head over to risky.biz, our website, and you will find the post for this podcast with all of the links in there. Now, was it last week or the week before, we spoke about a SAP Netweaver vulnerability, and we were like, this is going to be bad. Mm-hmm. This is going to be very bad. And it turns out, Adam, it's bad.
Shocking development. It is bad, yes. We are seeing pretty widespread exploitation of internet-facing SAP Netweaver. There's a bug in one of the components called the Visual Composer. So that's not great, and as we predicted. But sort of worse than that, it looks like it's Chinese APTs, and in fact the same crew that were behind a bunch of other quite successful large-scale exploitation of internet-facing bugs. So stuff in I think some of the Ivanti things,
but they're trash. These guys are trash. If you look, we've got a blog post from Eclectic IQ, and they're scanning for. So there's been a couple of components to this. Someone's gone around and dropped web shells on all of these SAP boxes, right? So now there's this second wave of exploitation, and who knows if it's the same actor. But one of the actors, scanning for this stuff, they've got their box just doing all the scanning, and then an open web server on it where you can drop in and just read all of their scan results and stuff. And you just think, my God, man, that's aren't you embarrassed?
I mean, you probably should be, but I guess if you move fast enough, you don't got time for doing it right. You just got to shell all of the NetWeavers today so that you can go back and pick them over at a later date. But yeah, it is a little bit orcs when you've got the indexing turned on your web server full of all of your shell results. But yeah, these guys
you get a scan probe from some box, you hit it, and there's a web server on it, with the scan results in it. Like,
I mean, it's convenient for everybody else. Like maybe you want to muddy the attribution for the source. Incompetence seems more likely. But yeah, I mean, regardless of how good they are at their infrastructure, they do seem pretty good at shelling things. And this Eclectic IQ write-up has a bunch of information about their specific TTPs and so on. One of the ones that leapt out at me as being amusing is some of the C2 traffic goes to a box whose domain name is sentinel1splural.com.
Yeah.
Which, apropos of you talking to Stamos the other day about, there being a team of people in China tasked to attack, Sentinel-1, go on with their customers. It's kind of funny to see their name in the mouth of the set of attackers as well. So kind of funny, just leapt out at me when I was looking at screenshots.
Yeah, we got links to that, of course, in the show notes as well this week. Now let's look at a piece by Dan Gooden. Apparently a software engineer from Doge had an infostealer on their box that was just, popping up, spewing creds out everywhere, basically. Their creds out everywhere. I mean, again, this ties into what we've said from day one about the way Doge was doing stuff, which is, they're moving fast and breaking things, but they're not being careful, and that was going to present problems. And, what is this? Exhibit
437. Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. So this one was, like, initially when I read it, I thought, because the angle was, this guy's data's in have I been pwned. And let's face it, everybody's data is in have I been pwned. But the interesting bit is that this is not just like other people's data breaches, with cred dumps from big sites. This is data from infostealer Trojans, malware on people's boxes that is also ingested by have I been pwned. And some of the data is, within the last couple of years, which is not a great sign for someone that is wandering around the US government helping themselves to, enterprise admin level access in their SharePoints and in their Office 365s and so on. So not a great look. And, we don't know for sure that the machines they're using to do their doging are filled with infostealers, but it's certainly possible.
Well, I mean, there was that news item we spoke about a little while ago where they were spinning up new accounts for government systems. Yes. And then those accounts, Russian IPs were trying to log into them a couple of minutes later and only denied because of their impossible travel restrictions. And your take on that at the time was, they were probably just using a Russian VPN or something, some VPN service. But I don't know, man. I still think we need to take a look at that, honestly.
I do not disagree with you. It does not look good. Like there is definitely a bit of, where there's smoke, there's fire kind of situation. There's several pieces of smoke floating around here.
The smoke is wafting from multiple locations. Now, over the last couple of weeks as well, both here and in our Risky Bulletin podcasts, which everyone should subscribe to too, we do 3 news bulletins a week, which are put together by Catalin Kimpanu, edited by Ewan Amberley and sometimes me, and then voiced by Claire Aird. It's a great little news bulletin for those who are unfamiliar with it. You can find that by searching for Risky Bulletin. But yeah, we've been covering this thing that's been happening in Asia, particularly in Japan, where hackers have been breaking into brokerage accounts and then using the funds in those brokerage accounts to buy penny stocks that they hold. And this is a way to make millions of dollars. So initially, it was we were reporting on this because they said it was something like, $700 million. And we were like, oh my God, that's so much money. Turns out, Adam, it's actually much worse. And we're looking at something like $2 billion in fraudulent trades in a relatively short period of time. That's really quite an issue.
Yeah, the Japanese Financial Services Agency, their regulator for this kind of thing, has been looking into it. And yeah, it is definitely bigger than we originally reported. And so the $2 billion number, I think, is the amount of trades that have been done. So we don't know how much money the actual attackers are making. Clearly it's enough for them to be able to make this worth doing. But yeah, the fact that it's that much bigger than we thought, and the Japanese regulator had some stats that said in previous years, this kind of thing was much, much smaller. So it has definitely, tracked up pretty quickly. One theory is that because AI, ChatGPT, et cetera, are so much better now, you can carry out these kinds of attacks in languages and environments that aren't necessarily your own, because you can interact with these systems much more easily. And so that's one plausible explanation for why we're seeing it tick up. And Japan, for example, has historically been quite a difficult target because of the language barrier. versus English speaking environments or or other things. So
yeah.
yeah,
Ryan Callenber from Proofpoint is quoted in this piece as saying that. And I know Ryan, he's a mate, and he's been on this for a while. Like, he's been on this from very early on with AI, working at a place like Proofpoint where they deal with so much phishing. He's like, man, this is going to be really useful for attackers to, as it says in this piece, draft, culturally appropriate phishing lures. It's just like, what an amazing thing for phishers. And one of the regions that he was particularly concerned about was Japan. So Ryan, looks like you were right there, buddy. Hey, how you going? Also, and yeah, this piece was written by John Grieg over at The Record. But you had something else you wanted to add there?
Oh, I was just thinking, like, I'm trying to think what other countries have impenetrable languages. And I thought, they're going to be coming for Finland next.
I don't think the models are there yet. But let's see. We got a couple of law enforcement takedowns to talk through here. We saw we got a TechCrunch piece here from Lorenzo. A joint international law enforcement action shut down 2 services accused of providing a botnet of hacked internet-connected devices. This looks like one of those residential proxies, which are very useful when you want to hide your origin, but that one's been taken down.
Yeah, so this is Any Proxies, I think was the retail name that they used. And this one was kind of significant because they've been around like 20 years. Like, this is the OG of residential proxies. And I was also surprised, given they've been doing it for 20 years, that the amount of money they made was something in the order of 40-ish million, I think the DOJ said, $46 million, which for 20 years work, I mean, it's more money than I've made in 20 years. But
yeah, I mean, come on, man.
At the same time, like for 20 years cybercrime, I feel like you could do better than $40 million.
Yeah, if you're going to be a criminal, like that's kind of the lower end, right?
It does seem. But either way, they've been shut down. Of course, they were, I think, Russians. So I don't know what consequences they will face, but I mean, just continuing that whack-a-mole of internet crime, kind of components, because this is another example of Russian cybercrime bits that are just really useful when you want to go do a crime, be able to buy access from residential IPs in another country near your victims.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Darina Antoniuk also over at The Record has reported that a few dudes have been arrested in Poland, and they were operating like a Stressor botnet kind of thing. And, you could give them like $10 and they'd hit a target for you, I think. Was that this one? Yes, yeah. It was pretty cheap. They had a low-end €10 service or something like that, which I don't know how much DDoS you get for €10, but I mean, how much do you really need, Well, I mean, if you're not paying for the bandwidth, like, you can sell it cheap, right?
Yeah,
so
I guess
that's kind of the idea.
This is just worth a quick mention, but there was a PowerSchool, this is a company that makes software used by schools. There was a PowerSchool breach a while ago, and data was ransomed, and they paid. And unfortunately, it looks like now the people who have that data are going back out to the schools and ransoming them again. So it looks like this is one of those instances where paying for deletion, just they didn't do it. Most of the time they do. And the reason they do is because they need to be credible when they're asking for money next time. So I'd imagine there would be other data extortionists who would be quite cheesed about this, actually.
Yeah. We don't really know exactly like how it all worked out, like whether the data was, available in multiple places, like whether we don't know if it's the people who took the payment also now doing the subsequent round of extortion, but either way, it impacts their reputation. I imagine they are, as you say, probably quite cheesed off at whoever is behind it if it's not them. And if it is them, like maybe they've reached the end of the road and they've decided that, they are going to exit the market soon, so they may as well cash out, as much as they can with the data they've got right now. Regardless, it still sucks for the schools and the parents and the children and, of the, the victims involved in this campaign.
Yeah, that one was from Kevin Collier over at NBC. Back to The Record now, and Alexander Martin has reported that the EU is launching a vulnerability database, which is interesting. So it's kind of been written up as like, NVD is looking shaky and that's why this is happening. But really the plans for this, according to our colleague Catalin Kimpanu, the plans for this were sort of laid out in 2022. But I think it's a good idea that an organization like ENISA, which is the EU's cybersecurity organization, actually spins up something like this, because the stuff in America doesn't look as reliable or, as it used to. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I guess whoever was behind this, starting this in 2022, probably feels quite vindicated now. Like, actually, yes, Europe probably does need a little bit of independence, from the US and from other countries. They're going to use the Chinese vulnerability database. So yeah, probably feeling pretty forward thinking. And, if the outcome of the madness in America lately is we do end up with a more distributed, more resilient kind of set of international infrastructures like this, because I can imagine Australia and New Zealand, for example, using the European vulnerability database as well as the American one, as well as other countries' ones, much like we now have multiple satellite navigation networks, and people can rely on GPS and whatever the European one is called, and whatever the GLONASS, the Russian one. You can have multiple ones, so it's probably good overall.
Yep, and we're going to head towards the finish now. We've got a few items to go, but we've got a couple of these things that I never understand, right? Which is like, basically we got a Spectre style attack here. Walk us through it. This one's from VUSC.
Yeah, so there's these researchers from VUSC, which I think is their Amsterdam, they're Dutch, looking into a kind of a variant of Spectre memory side channel attacks. So the thing that they have done here is they have figured out how to essentially bypass some of the constraints that we were relying on, some of the mitigations we were relying on to prevent side channel leaking across trust boundaries in modern CPUs. They've come up with essentially some tricks that can bypass basically all of the existing Spectre side channel mitigations. And this means that they've got, they have sort of a generic technique that circumvents sort of the architectural controls where you shouldn't be able to influence, in this case, the branch prediction from, some user space to kernel space, for example. So they've got some things where you can kind of train the branch predictor in kernel space and then use that to leak information about what it's doing. They've also found in the process of this research some CPU bugs that they can then use to do this, in some cases, across guest to host hypervisor boundary. They got a POC where
they can leak hypervisor memory at 8.5 kilobytes a second, which is going to be
the research is pretty dense. Like, it's quite heavy going if you're not familiar with all of the previous work on side channels, but the end results are pretty convincing, which is like, wow, yeah, hypervisor, from a guest up to the hypervisor onto other virtual machines. Not a great look, and right up to really modern Intel hardware as well. So that's some great research, and I pity the people who run cloud infrastructure who now have to think about this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's hard enough for me to just think about it for 5 minutes talking to you about it. But yeah, all these speculative execution things are confusing to people like me. And we've also got another one, and it's something similar from, what is it, ETH Zurich?
Yeah, ETH Zurich. So this is basically the same target, so the branch prediction in the CPUs, and being able to use that to leak memory. But the ETH Zurich research essentially is a race condition between when you train the branch predictor, because the guts of all of these bugs is you set up the branch prediction in the CPU, and then you let it run code that you want to learn about, and you infer the behavior of that code by looking at how the branch predictor changed state. And one of the ways that we've worked around this is by flushing the branch prediction cache when we transition between security boundaries. So when you move from executing guest code to executing hypervisor code, the CPU is meant to be able to throw out the state of the branch predictor and carry on. This is a race condition in that process where the results of branch predictions that were in flight at the time of the transition between security zones land after that zone transition and still impact the state of the cache. So it's that race condition means that, yeah, they can influence, across those security boundaries. And their proof of concept is also pretty compelling. It's like, I would like to read the, system password file on a Unix box.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's, that's pretty handy.
Yeah. So like, there's a lot of nerd crap, in these kind of research. They're like super academic, really dense, hard to read, but the proof of concept, honestly, pretty straightforward to understand. Run command, receive, root password hash, pretty compelling.
Yes, I would agree. That's compelling. And apologies to them for calling them ETH Zurich. The cryptocurrency people have melted my brain. It is ETH Zurich, of course. A fun one here, very much at a different end of the spectrum, which is a slide deck from Black Hat Asia from April, looking at some work a group of people did here. What's the name? PC Automotive. 3 researchers, Polina Smirnova, Mikhail Evdokomov and Radu Motspan. I'm very sorry I massacred your names, but they looked at doing some security research against a Nissan LEAF, like a 2020 model, and they could go from Bluetooth to like starting the car. So, a bit of stunt hacking here, but a really great slide deck with a walkthrough on how they did it.
Yeah, and honestly, like going through their research, I felt this is beyond stunt hacking. Like, this is actually pretty legit, right?
Oh, but you know what I mean. Like the concept is stunt hacking, but it is a good write-up.
Yeah, and so they bought essentially the like head-end guts and telematics units and stuff from an Nissan LEAF, and then reverse engineered firmware every step of the way, and circumvented all of the controls that got in their way, and then found memory corruption via Bluetooth, turned that into command exec on the head end. From there, shelled towards the like CAN bus interface that talks out to the rest of the car, got code exec on that, figured out how like the CAN bus message filtering worked, like bought a test, like the sort of thing that mechanics would use to send undocumented, proprietary CAN bus commands for the LEAF, reverse engineer those so that they could, get out there and net result, whole thing end to end, Bluetooth. It's not quite zero interaction. You have to be on the like network settings screen, and they're like, yes, we can denial of service to Wi-Fi, so that someone goes, why isn't this connecting? Goes to the Wi-Fi connection screen, and then that's all it's needed to trigger the Bluetooth bugs, and then onwards from there to root on the infotainment system and full access to the CAN bus, control the steering, control the doors. Like, it's impressive work. And they must have had so much fun doing it as well. So, good work.
Yeah, I like how they just went to a wrecker, an auto wrecker, and just like grabbed one of these things and stuck it in a rack. Like, that's pretty cool. And we've got rubbing my temples, right? What week of risky business would be complete without talking about some Ivanti and Fortinet bugs? Hey!
Yay! Yeah. So we have Ivanti's endpoint manager mobile, whatever it is, product. They have some high CVSS bugs in it. They are blaming open source code that they put in there. They won't say which open source code. Just trust us. We're getting shelled again. Just trust us. I think Catalan wrote in his script, it was very dry. It was like, they blamed a bunch of libraries. They have not named the libraries. Yeah, exactly. If you're an Ivanti customer, you are well used to getting owned and having to patch your stuff. So go patch your stuff and probably roll incident response again. And then, yes, of course, our friends at Fortinet, oh, God, they've got a stack-based buffer overflow in the year 2025 of our Lord. Stack-based buffer overflow in like half a dozen products that you would have in your network edge.
Including their NDR product, which is just
40 voice, 40 mail.
For those following at home, that the NDR stands for network detection and response. So look, to be fair, like NDRs are usually pretty good targets because they have to parse so much, right? So they're full of parsers, but still, woof.
Yeah, it's a little bit orcs when you buy your security products, put them on the edge of the network, and then they are the things that get you shelled. So yes, there are Stack Overflow bugs, and like the list of products that are affected is pretty huge. The camera products, their video recording products, NDR, mail filtering stuff. So it's just gross. They've got a few IOCs, because of course people are out there exploiting it in the wild. We have to assume it's probably, Chinese APT as usual. And they are doing the thing where they the exploitation will also dump log files and stuff so they can get them later. And presumably that's for, if you do manage to be a victim, they've still got an option to go pull enough data to get back in, much like we've seen with other products. So yeah, pretty standard Fortinet owning day for Fortinet owners.
Well, mate, that actually brings us to the end of this week's news segment. Thank you very much for joining me. Great fun as always, and we'll do it all again next week.
Yeah, well, we certainly will, and I'm sure there'll be yet more Fortinet bugs for us to talk about. What fun, yay.
That was Adam Boileau there with a look at the week's security news. It is time for this week's sponsor interview now with Travis McPeak, who is the founder of Resourcely. And Resourcely is an interesting company that makes a platform that helps you to generate and wrangle Terraform, right? So instead of your Terraform being a complete mess with no sort of procedures there for you to actually spin up infrastructure, Resourcely absolutely solves that problem. But we're talking to Travis today because he has built something new as part of Resourcely, which is the platform can now fix things, right? Now, you might say, okay, and we get into this in the interview, you might say, well, Wiz can remediate a lot, but as Travis points out, it is a brave cloud admin who selects remediate all with Wiz and just hits the go for it button because that's a recipe for a really bad day. So he's taking a different approach to try to more systematically eradicate the source of problems and the source of misconfigurations in an environment. So here is Travis McPeak telling us all about Resourcely Fix. Enjoy.
I think security people rightfully have a ton of anxiety because they have this giant cloud environment. They go and log into their CNAPP dashboard and the thing is just, red with pages and pages and pages of stuff that they don't have the ability or time to address. And then they need to do something. Like sometimes when you buy a CNAPP, you actually create a new problem because before you were flying blind, life was good, you were blissfully ignorant. Now you buy this solution, it's like, oh crap, there's a ton of risk. And to the extent that you have a funded security team, the job of that team is to reduce risk for the business and do so in a way that's quantifiable and provable to leadership. Then you get more funding for security. So that's really why we've built Fix, is to answer that customer question of how do we clean up all of the security issues in our brownfield cloud?
Okay, I mean, that sounds great, but why wouldn't you just use the incumbent solutions out there like Wiz or whatever? Like, it seems like maybe you're a little bit late to this party. Like, isn't that a solved problem, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so let's say that Wiz had perfect remediation for every single issue. So every cloud misconfiguration that they showed you in Wiz had a little button that you can toggle that would say, fix this. They do have that for some, but let's say that every single one had it. What security team would have the confidence to go in there and select all and apply? Like, if you do that, you're going to cause not just one outage, you're going to cause 10,000 outages. You're going to be buried in outages for the next 10 years.
Stuff's going to be on fire, like, immediately.
Yep. And I have friends that have run those kind of projects where they just started remediating stuff. They didn't coordinate with devs and it caused outages, and people told the security team to stop. This is really what we're adding, is the ability to coordinate those changes in a way that's careful. So one of the projects I ran was RepoKid. We would actually go and coordinate with developers, ask them, is it okay to make this change? Sometimes they would say, come back at this later time and make the change. Then we'd make the change and we'd communicate that we did it, and we'd give them a big button they could press if something was messed up that would put it back to where it was. That's really the bit that all of these platforms are missing. If you're an advanced company, then you might build this yourself. You might implement like a SOAR type of tool to do this kind of coordination. But our position is that you should just have one solution that will both make the change for you and also do all of this coordination that's very manual. You have to track things in Google Sheets and do a bunch of manual Slack reach outs. So we're implementing all of that in one place.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, like Travis was on the show something like 5 years ago when he worked at Netflix, talking about RepoKid, which was a really awesome like open source project. I mean, you developed it for internal use at Netflix, but open sourced it. And what it would do was monitor like AWS, I think in that instance, for unused like IAM roles, right? Like unused permissions essentially, and it would just take them away if nobody was using it. So, okay, so going back to this, yeah, the idea being that you have a third option, right? In the case of some sort of cloud security issue. So the traditional options have been, okay, that's great, don't touch it, leave it alone. And the other option is like, okay, auto remediate that, cross your fingers, hope for the best. So I guess what you're proposing here is a third option, which is like, okay, kick off a workflow here that's going to see this thing get fixed. Like, that seems like a management issue, not like so much a hard tech issue. Like in your platform, when you decide to kick off a remediation here, how does it know which developer to reach out to? And like, what does the platform do then? How do you actually skin this cat?
Yeah, so ownership is hard in all aspects of security. It's unsolved in many companies.
Hence the question.
Yes, exactly. So we can pick up some breadcrumbs. So for example, if it is managed in infrastructure as code, we're going to get some signals like this is the person that made the pull request for it. This is who reviewed it. This is who touched it last. If you are deploying directly to cloud, then you can look at things like CloudTrail. In some cases, though, like in a lot of companies, security just has a hunch. Like, oh, this is part of this application. You know, we've dealt with this particular developer on this application before. Let's just go and ask them. But like I said, it's extremely manual.
Yeah. Okay. So, so how do you do it then? Like, what's the user experience for an admin who is trying to remediate some issue that this thing's identified? You know, what do they then do as the person driving your platform?
Yep. So end to end, what we're going to do is they're going to pull up some systemic fix they want to make across the board. We're going to apply SCPs. We're going to get rid of this particular class of whiz finding. We're going to get rid of IAM users, whatever it is. We're going to pull that in. We're going to make a list of all of them. That is not secret sauce, like we all said, visibility solved. But then at that point, we're going to ingest these signals of ownership. That's going to get a bunch of them. The ones that aren't, you're going to have this list like, need to figure out the owner for that. If you have a guess, you can send it out. It'll send a Slack message, email. Developer will get something that's basically like, cloud security wants to change this. Are you responsible for it? They'll get like a nice, easy button. And then if they confirm ownership, great. You have the right person you're coordinating. Sometimes that person may not even know. And then they'll just throw it back to security and you can continue triaging. In a lot of cases, they say, I'm not the owner. This other person over here is. So instead of, again, security having to do this weird Slack dance, we'll just automate it for them.
And is that the touch point for most of the developers? It's through Slack, or is it like email, or dare I say it, God forbid, like Jira tickets or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I thought you were going to say Teams. Yeah, yes, those things. So what we've learned is developers do not want to log into a security tool and operate out of there. They want to operate with the tools that they're already using, whether that be GitHub, Jira. That's, you know, in a lot of cases when we say we're doing DevSecOps, that's what we mean is we're gonna file Jira tickets because that's how developers consume their work. But yeah, we are going to give them easiest communication, lowest friction. You know, even in the case of a Jira ticket today, you know, you have some CNAP issue. Status quo is you create a Jira ticket. You have some way of assigning that Jira ticket now, right? If it has a 10.0 CVE like vulnerability on it, you're going to find out really quickly who's the owner. But there's instructions. Log into the console, do this thing, and then change this. Now you're multiplying that tax on a developer figuring out how to change their infrastructure on every single developer on every single change you need to make. So instead of doing all of that, we'll give them a fix it button that'll just go make the change for them and then tell them it's done and give them a unfix it button if it's broken.
Yeah, okay. So like one example you just gave was like these SCP guardrails, which are that's an Amazon thing, right?
Yep.
Yeah, see, I'm old enough that all of this cloud stuff is still newfangled and confusing. But, you know, I'm guessing there's going to be other examples of, you know, you mentioned like classes and categories of issues that might be exposed through like Wiz, right? Like, what are some of the categories of issues that you're sort of targeting with this, right? Because I'd imagine, you know, you've got your classics like open buckets, you've got other stuff like, yeah, like these guardrails and whatnot. But what are some others?
Yeah, so anything that's internet facing is worth at least a look. Maybe those are designed to be internet facing, but in those cases, you'd at least like documentation about why they're internet facing and it's not just a mistake. So all of those, you know, open databases, open buckets, open virtual machines, any of those would be one class. And then there's just like common awful cloud misconfiguration. Like IAM users had a place in time. That place in time was 10 years ago or more. And today they're just a big tax on your environment. If you get compromised in cloud, it's almost certainly going to be some IAM user static key that leaked somewhere, and then now they're in your cloud. So any of that kind of stuff, least privilege, scoping down IAM roles, applying backups, making sure that you're replicating things across regions, making sure that your logging's turned on all the places you expect. Basically, like any cloud configuration that security wanted to have, we're going to go and assist them in getting their cloud converged to that state.
Now, one thing you haven't mentioned here, which is staggering, is AI. Like, surely it's a new feature in a modern security product. Surely it uses AI, Travis.
You know, it's not a major focus. We do not want AI vibe changing your cloud properties. That thing should be done deterministically. It should work really well. But what we can do is we can use AI cleverly to assist with some of the triage, you know, who's the right owner for this thing, and then also move things up and down based on context. So, for example, if we see that something that's public facing has stuff around it that indicates it should be public facing, then we can add that as notes and maybe you don't even bother fixing that thing, or you just suggest to the user, hey, it looks like this thing's deliberately public. Here's what AI found about it. And then they can decide the right thing to do. All of these just reduce human labor for it, but it's not actually going to go and make the cloud changes because that's terrifying.
So Travis, like I believe also, like we can't go through this interview without discussing your motivations for doing this. And I believe a primary motivator for you developing this feature set is rage.
Rage, yes. Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah,
So,
so
like, tell us, share with us your anger right now. It's a safe space.
Yes. So security teams that buy a scanner and then file JIRA tickets and tell developers to do all of the work, in my opinion, are adding zero value to the organization. Like, you do not need security in the loop at all. If that is the value that you provide, then we should just riff the entire security team. What the security team should do is apply their knowledge of security and then help reduce risk in a way that's quantifiable. If you can't, at the end of a year, go to your leadership and say, hey, we eliminated these classes of issues. These are not things that we have to worry about anymore. And that was the number 1, 2, and 3 on the top cloud misconfiguration list. Then your security team is not pulling their weight. And I see way too many security teams that are, one, like happy with just filing a ticket and calling a day. And two, they don't even think about that kind of risk remediation. They're thinking about whatever the compliance auditor is going to come and check, so they can have a clean report. And then you might have an open bucket or an open database that's on the internet that has your crown jewels. That's not considered a vulnerability. But if you have this CVE5 over here in some system in your sandbox, that thing's going to be remediated because that's what compliance auditors check.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yes. But I guess, I guess really to sum it up then, as we wrap it up, I mean, this is much more, I mean, I hate using these sorts of terms, but it's like kind of more like a shift left idea. Get to the root of a lot of these things that are bubbling up into your cloud sec scanners and panels and, and just being able to eliminate classes of issues rather than just playing whack-a-mole, right?
Yeah, I've always said if you have a security tool and that security tool is telling you everything's on fire all of the time, what happens, it's natural human instinct. We become desensitized to that thing. So we're like, okay, dashboard says we have 12,000 issues. Like, I guess we're just going to have 12,000 issues, and then people stop paying attention to it at all. And so you should either take a whole class of issues and say, we're never going to fix this and make those issues go away from the dashboard so you stop looking at it, or you should reduce the risk of those issues. If you have a thing that's just blinking red all the time, everybody's going to ignore it and nothing's going to happen from it.
I mean, you're speaking fluent VM right now. You're speaking fluent vulnerability management. It's just amazing that, like, when I talk to Nucleus about their stuff, their vulnerability management platform, a big thing they say is like, once you get that visibility, you can start looking for root causes. Why does this division in the company produce these sort of bugs and this division doesn't? Like, what can they learn from each other? And it seems like a similar sort of mindset here. Travis McPeak, thank you so much for joining us to walk through Resourcely Fix. Sounds very interesting, and I wish you all the best with it.
Thank you.
That was Travis McPeak from Resourcely there. Big thanks to him for that. And that is it for this week's show. I do hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back soon with more security news and analysis. But until then, I've been Patrick Gray. Thanks for listening.